Abraham said. "Last Saturday he got drunk, like he always does after he gets his pay. He was walking home, and somehow he got hold of a gun. Don't know if he brung it with him. I never knowed Jimmy to carry a gun. Anyway, he popped it off right there a couple of times on Commerce Street, down at the end there by the depot. He didn't hit anybody, but a couple of men saw him. They brought him here." "We can't leave him up there," I said. "Well, sir, we have to," said Abraham. "Why is that?" "Because they told the people came to cut Jimmy down. They wanted him left here as a warning for the others." "You afraid to cut him down, Abraham? This man needs to be buried." "We got no way to carry him." "Across the mule's back," I said. "I can walk it, or I can ride with you." "I'm an old man, Mr. Corbett. I can't climb that tree." "Well, I can, but I don't have a knife," I said. Abraham produced an excellent bowie knife with a bone handle. It was only when I was directly under Jimmy Patton's body that I saw someone had severed his fingers and toes. Where his digit should have been, there were bloody stumps. I made quick work of climbing the cherry tree. "Yes, sir," Abraham said. "Sometime they cut off pieces to take for souvenirs. And sometimes they sell 'em, at the general store, at the barber shop. 10 cents for a nigger toe, 25 cents for a nigger thumb." I waved my hand at the ugly explosion of blood on the front of Jimmy Patton's trousers. "That's right," said Abraham. "Sometimes they don't stop at fingers and toes." I felt lightheaded and nauseated again. "Just stop talking for a minute, would you, Abraham?" I sawed at the rope with a knife for what seemed like an hour. Jimmy Patton finally fell to the ground with a sickening thud. Somehow I managed to climb down that tree. Somehow I got the Indian blanket out from under Abraham's saddle and wrapped around the dead man. With Abraham's help, I got Jimmy onto the mule. His body was so stiff from rigor mortis that I had to balance him just so, like a pine log. "We better get out of here," Abraham said. "Somebody watching us for sure." "Where? I don't see anybody." "I don't see 'em," he said, "but I know they watching us, just the same." We made it back through the peach orchard onto the road, all the way back to town without meeting a soul. I walked the mule by its rope, hoping it would help to be out front, but there was nowhere to walk without breathing in the smell of Jimmy Patton's decomposing flesh, the coppery smell of his blood. "I'm ready to write that report, Abraham," I said. "Yes, sir," he said. "I imagine you are." Chapter 52. Suddenly it was Sunday, and I was back in a world I recognized. I didn't admit to myself why I felt so lighthearted. I splashed my face with lilac water and clipped a fresh collar to my shirt. But it wasn't until I was standing at the bright yellow door of Elizabeth Begley's white mansion that I admitted what had made me so happy, yet apprehensive, the prospect of seeing her again. The door swung open even before I could knock. At a house so grand, I naturally expected to be greeted by a servant, but instead I found the door opened by its owner, Elizabeth's husband, a short, bald man with an amiable smile. "Well, you must be the famous Benjamin Corbett of Washington, attorney at law," he said. "I am," I said, "and you must be the much more famous Richard Nottingham, senator and man of influence." He smiled. "You got that just about right," he said, grabbing my hand. That hand had not been shaken so vigorously since Roosevelt operated it at the White House. Maybe it was a habit of politicians to inflict pain on new acquaintances as an aid to memory. Lizzie talks so much about you, I feel like we already know each other. Lizzie. The familiarity of the nickname made me wince inwardly. I've been looking forward to meeting you, I said. She speaks fondly of you. Oh, now he's making that up, said Elizabeth, coming up behind her husband. Don't lie, Ben. Richard knows I haven't spoken fondly of him in years. She threw her husband a big stage wink. At least, not in public. Nottingham laughed. Isn't she a delight? I agreed that she was, in a most unspecific murmur. Then I followed them into a small drawing room off the rear of the center hall. Ben, Richard and I are so happy you came. There may be a few people here you don't know. This looked a lot like the gathering at L.J. Stringer's mansion, the same aging stuffed shirts, the same overstuffed dresses, a faint smell of mothballs. Elizabeth led me to a stout couple on the fringed velvet love seat. This is Senator Oscar Winkler and his dear wife, Livia. I noticed that state senators dropped the state, turning themselves into real senators. Senator Winkler clasped my hand. Nice to see you again, Ben. I was surprised he remembered me. Many years ago, as political editor for the Eudora High School Bugler, I had interviewed Senator Winkler for a column entitled Eudora Looks Forward. He had been warm to me and wise in his comments. One thing he said I had never forgotten. He said it, then asked me not to print it. The Southern man who figures out a way to bridge this terrible divide between the black and the white will enjoy all the blessings our Lord can bestow. I shook the senator's hand and kissed his wife's. As I was straightening up, I heard Elizabeth say, "And I do believe you already know this fella." I turned. To my astonishment, I found myself smiling and extending my hand to one Judge Everett Corbett. He shook it quite formally and made a little bow. Ben, always a pleasure, he said. I hope your business down here is going well. Richard Nottingham clapped his hands. Lizzie, I heard just a bit too much preaching this morning, and presently I'm about to starve to death. Everything the man said had that odd quality of being humorously intended but not actually funny. Could we please have our dinner? Chapter 53. I was pleased about two things immediately. One, Elizabeth seated me next to herself at the table. Two, turtle soup was not on the Nottingham's menu. I'd eaten a skimpy breakfast, expecting the usual 6 or 7 course Southern exercise in dinner-time excess. Instead, I found the food a touch on the dainty side. Deviled eggs, shrimp remoulade, cucumber sandwiches, pimento cheese, and a big silver dish of pickles. My father was also dishing it up, the personification of silver-haired charm, as he could be at those times when he let himself be roped into a social event. I really owe you and Elizabeth a debt of gratitude, he told Nottingham. If it weren't for you, who knows if I'd even get to see my son again before he heads home. I recognized that as a clear signal, now that we'd seen each other and been observed acting cordially toward each other. My job was done. I was welcome to go back to Washington any time. Oh, I'm not going home yet, Dad, I said over the back of the settee. I held up my glass of claret. I'm grateful too, Richard. My father and I don't get to see each other enough. It's so rare to see him in such a cheerful and expansive mood. My father gave out a little laugh. Ben is quite a character, he said. He's come down to tell us all where we went wrong. He thinks the South ought to be able to change overnight." Richard Nottingham was glancing from my father to me, as if wondering whether this dispute was going to lead to blows among all this expensive china and crystal. "I'm just hoping for a South that returns to the rule of law," I said. "I just want a place where the Ku Klux Klan is not hanging black men from every available tree." I knew that I was treading dangerously here, but I couldn't help myself. "Now you're being plain ignorant," my father said. "You don't seem to remember that the Klan was outlawed about 40 years ago." "I remember it very well," said Olivia Winkler. "My daddy said it was the end of civilization." Senator Winkler cleared his throat. "Now, Judge, you know as well as I do that outlawing something does not guarantee that it ceases to exist," he said. "As a matter of fact, that's one of the best ways to ensure its continuing existence, to forbid it." They glared at each other. It struck me that they had had this argument before, when I was nowhere around. It also reminded me that there were many good men and women in the South, even here in Eudora. I was about to say something in support of Winkler when a servant girl walked in bearing a large round cake, frosted white on a silver platter. Nottingham brightened. "Why, Lizzie, is that a hummingbird cake?" "Of course it is. I had them make it just for you. Richard's going off to Jackson next week. We'll miss his birthday, but we can all celebrate tonight." Something happened then that sent an electric jolt through my body. It was all I could do to keep from bolting upright in my seat. As she said these words to her husband, I felt Elizabeth's hand gently pat the inside of my thigh. "Ben," she said, "you must try the cake." Chapter 54. "No, sir." "No, not today, Mr. Corbett." "No, sir, nothing today." Maybelle always had the same answer to the question I asked her at least once every day. First I would check the table in the front hall, then I'd convince myself that a letter had come and Maybelle was keeping it from me because she knew how anxiously I waited. I would go ask her and she would say, "No, sir." It had been 11 days since I'd written to Meg. I'd imagined that my love had fairly leapt off the page when she read it and that she would write back immediately. That letter had not yet arrived. Meanwhile, I was keeping someone else waiting. President Roosevelt expected a report on what I had found out about lynching in and around Eudora. I had spent the past 2 evenings on a long letter to the president that gave precise locations right down to the species of the hanging trees. I included the names of victims and the approximate times and dates of their murders. Then I showed the letter to Abraham. He read it and said, "If it was me, I'd make it like a telegram, short and sweet. Dear Mr. President, it's worse than you heard. Send the army. Stop." Abraham was right. I remembered years ago at Las Guasimas when Roosevelt spoke to me for the first time. He glared down from his horse. "Do you have provisions for an overnight, Captain?" "Sir, I ordered the men to double their rations and to fill their canteens and—" "Stop!" Roosevelt commanded. "That was a yes or no question." "Yes, sir," I said. And now it took Abraham to remind me of Roosevelt's fondness for a concise report. "Send it to him in a wire," he said. "That's a good idea, but I can't send it from Eudora." The telegraph operator in town was Harry Kelleher, who was also the station master. The moment I left the depot after sending my wire to the White House, Kelleher would personally see that the contents were passed on to every man, woman, and child in Eudora. "Where can I go, Abraham?"